everybody, it's Mia.
And Jan.
And Jan's still getting used to this. And I guess welcome to the Mia and Jan show, because we still didn't have a cool, quirky, fun, witty name.
Nope.
But I'm fine with that for now. We're tired parents. We haven't had the bandwidth to come up with a cool name in quarantine. But if you have any ideas, please feel free to leave us a comment below. So today's episode...
How about Jam?
Jam? OMG, ship our name. Oh my gosh. Is that even appropriate for people our age? So if you're new here, we want to say welcome and let you know that this podcast is a recent experiment. It's kind of an extension of my personal YouTube channel where I talk about mental health and motherhood and mindful living. And I wanted to start a podcast with my husband because A, it's a great way for us to be able to record some content after the kids go to sleep without having to worry about lighting and how we look, because let's be real, it's 9 o'clock at night. And B, it's an opportunity for people like you to hear the perspective of a husband and a wife, people in an equal partnership, people who are parents. We have 2 kids, ages 3.5 and 1.5. And I just really wanted to dive deep. So we've tackled so far topics like navigating mental illness in marriage, navigating layoffs in marriage. And overall, I would say the theme and mission of this podcast is to serve as kind of like that couple that you wish you were friends with. That sounds really suck up. But basically, in my opinion, I wish there was a couple that we were friends with that was super honest about parenthood, about marriage, about all the things that entails, like postpartum depression and what it's like actually having a baby and what it's like navigating that and what it's like having an intimate life after you've had kids and navigating the stress of layoffs and all of these things that I feel like no one's really talking about because everyone's trying so hard to look like they have it all together. So I essentially wanted to create a way for us to connect with other couples who are on a similar journey to us and just wanted to have some honesty in our lives because there's so much manicured stuff out there. I feel like we could all use a little bit more doses of reality. Anyway, another unique fun fact about Jan and myself, if you haven't noticed already, is we are a biracial couple, which I didn't realize was a thing. I feel like we need to provide some context, but I've already rambled so long in this intro. This episode is about racism and even deeper than that, talking about Ahmaud Arbery, and everyone's talking about it. And I really wanted to make an episode about that, but also just about racism in general. And then honestly, it also has how that pertains to us as a biracial couple. Mm-hmm. I think with the topic of racism, I mean, Black people, we already know. We already know that the murder of Ahmaud Arbery was a lynching. It was a hate crime. It was what somebody recently described it as terrorism, which I agree, because if we call people who come from out of our country to identify people by their religion or the color of their skin and murder them.
They don't even have to come from out of the country to be labeled terrorists.
Yeah, they don't have to come from out of the country, but we want to people so quickly label people who come from out of the country. I'm talking about like white supremacists who, if you're an immigrant, you must be a terrorist. That's what I'm talking about. Mm. And someone described this murder of Ahmaud Arbery as a terrorist act. And I agree, because you're literally, pinpointing someone based on the color of their skin. You're
scaring that entire community.
You're scaring that entire community. You're creating terror. And it's disgusting to me that people are exempting these murderers from that title. I don't want to even say title. What would you call it? That sounds too nice, but...
I mean, label.
From that label, because they don't like how it sounds, because people think that terrorist equals someone of color and someone who's not from here. And I want to say, no. These white people from Georgia are terrorists. And I'm not talking about all white people, so calm down. I'm talking about the people who murdered Ahmaud Arbery and all the other white supremacists that live in the South. We actually were thinking about moving to Georgia several times since we've been married 4.5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically Atlanta, but I'm going to tell you what. After hearing what happened, I am like, nope, it's a done deal. I'd rather remain broke in California than we're not broke.
Dead in Georgia.
Than dead in Georgia because of the color of my effing skin. So I'm sorry I'm a little bit slow. Usually I'm a lot peppier when it comes to conversation, but this murder hit me so hard, well, just like any other murder of a person of color, because when I see someone like Ahmaud Arbery get murdered, someone who was only 25, younger than me, it literally feels like my brother died. And I'm not saying that to take away from the grief of the actual family, and I'm definitely not grieving as if it was my real brother, but there is something very physiological and guttural and intense that happens, I think, in anyone in the Black community when someone dies like that, because it makes me and a lot of all people of color, and especially Black people when it's a Black murder, it makes us feel like we're a target. It makes us feel like there's a lot of assumptions being made about us. It's hurtful to know that there are people out there that are still defending these white supremacist murderers. It's just so difficult. But I wanted to make a podcast about this because I think that there are some people out there that want to be educated about racism, who want to actually understand where it's ingrained, what it entails.
Yeah, what it looks like, actually, because I think
Yes,
people have a weird idea
people think that
about what it looks
racism, like, oh, I'm not racist. I've never called anybody a nigger. That is literally the tip of the iceberg. Racism is so much more than that. And if you didn't realize that you could be racist, even if you didn't call someone a nigger, like, this episode is something you probably should listen to. If you're someone who actually wants to be aware and conscious about the problem of racism in this country. To give a little bit of background, I'm from Guam. So I'm actually African Caribbean, Mexican, and German. It's a long story, but my parents moved to Guam in the 80s and I was born and raised there. Guam is a tiny little island in Micronesia, 3-hour plane flight from the Philippines. So for a long time, and I still identify a lot as Pacific Islander, but I've been connecting more with my African roots, my Black community roots here, even my Hispanic roots. But all that's to say is I lived in an island where it was extremely diverse. Being in Micronesia, even though Guam is a U.S. territory, we had people from the islands of Chuuk, Ponape, Yap, Palau, Filipino, like huge Filipino community, Japanese, Fijians. I mean, I was in a tiny high school of only like 25 people. And in my freshman class of like 10 students, actually there was like more like 8, I sat in a classroom with a Fijian, a Chuukese, a Chamorro, which is a person native to Guam, a Japanese person, a white person. There was someone from Africa in my class. Like, Guam attracts a huge range of people. And it's not like America where it's kind of like fake diversity, where it's like there's a lot of different people, but everyone's segregated into their different communities. Guam, while there is some segregation, for the most part, you're going to end up in, for instance, a classroom with a bunch of different people because there's only so many schools. It's not like America where you have a school in Chinatown and a school in Koreatown where you're pretty much going to be surrounded by people who look like you. So it was completely normal for me to grow up with people who didn't look anything like me, who didn't believe what I believe, who didn't even talk the way I talk. Almost everyone was bilingual. And because I didn't look Chamorro, which is the native people of Guam, people knew I wasn't Chamorro. And so I was always like kind of labeled different, or like, are you military? Like, are you on Guam? And so I just was okay with being different because it was my upbringing. And my parents, my mom is Black and my dad is white. He is Hispanic, German, and my mom is African Caribbean. And my dad mostly looks white. And I'm saying that because I want people to understand that it wasn't weird for me also to see a biracial couple. That was my entire life. No one ever pointed it out. No one ever made it a thing. So I moved to America. Well, I should say the United States, the continental US, but you know. And I moved here in 2012 for college. And I go to this really small Catholic university, which was very good to me. And I had a great education there. I made some great friends. But literally the day I arrived on campus for orientation, people were identifying me by the color of my skin before they even asked me what my freaking name was. And I wanted so badly to fit in that I just didn't say anything because I was just glad that anyone even bothered to acknowledge my existence. And it only got worse. People continued to call me the Black girl. People continued to reference me by my skin color. People continued to ask me to be in the school brochures and to be the spokesperson at the fundraisers. And there was one other Black person on campus the entire time I went to school there. And while people might say it's a compliment, oh, you're a good public speaker, that's why we wanted you at the fundraisers, or you're pretty, or you're a great student, and that's why we want you in the brochures, I couldn't help but feel that I was being singled out because of the color of my skin. And here's the thing. I appreciate people's efforts to be more diverse, but don't just do it so that you look diverse. What are you actually doing to attract diversity into your organizations and companies and businesses and places of work? Because putting one Black person on the cover of your brochure is not actually taking steps to make that happen. For instance, some white people get really pissed when they hear that there are scholarships for people from African American descent or Native American or Hispanic, whatever, and they get mad. Like, why should you be privileged to benefit because of your skin color or your heritage? Well, let me explain something. There is this thing called generational poverty that happens when you have been systematically oppressed. For instance, a lot of my white friends in college had trust funds or savings accounts that they had access to when they were going to college, and they didn't have to work. And that's great and that's beautiful. And it was because their grandparents worked a great job as like a lawyer or a doctor. Maybe they were really hardworking. Maybe they were an accountant. And they were able to retire by the time that they were born, my classmates. And so 18, 19 years ago, when their grandparents were retired, they started a bank account for them, which accrued money over time. Let me explain the history of many people of color like me. My great-great-great-great-grandmother was on a sugarcane plantation as a slave. And then her descendants also inherited nothing because their grandmother was a slave, and so on and so forth. And then my mom, her mom was a single mom who worked 2 jobs to barely survive, couldn't afford to send her daughter to college. My mom got married young, had kids young, didn't have anything to give me, and I had to make a decision that if I wanted to go to college, I had to do it myself. 100% completely on my own. I had to make a decision when I was 9 years old that I was going to find a way to get to college. And I spent my entire elementary, middle, and high school working my tail end off to apply for scholarships. I received a ton of rejection, but got a few scholarships here and there. But what I'm saying is I'm disappointed that places that would use my face to look diverse didn't have scholarships for students who are diverse. If you want to attract people who are diverse, why don't you acknowledge the generational poverty that we were born into because of the enslavement that my ancestors had to overcome? So that's what I'm talking about when it comes to generational poverty, when it comes to people of color, and I just feel like I'm breaking down different aspects of racism, so just bear with me, is that if ancestors of mine and other people of color weren't able to go to the first colleges and become doctors and lawyers and accountants and business owners, because we were only allowed to be maids and cooks and servants, do you think that their descendants, like myself, would have the same privileges and opportunities of having a fund of any sort to go to college? So when I go to a school that is constantly using me for the color of my skin, and I don't think these people knew that they were doing that necessarily. I think that most people have good intentions. But what I want to make clear is that you can have a good intention and still offend somebody. You know, this happens not that much anymore, but a fair bit in the beginning of my marriage, our marriage. Jan's still here, even though I'm doing most of the talking. He's listening very intently. I would be hurt by something that Jan would do or say. And he would say, that wasn't my intention. I didn't intend to hurt you. Well, of course, I know that Jan loves me. But you can still hurt someone even if you didn't intend to. And that means that you should still apologize and ask why or how you hurt that person and ask what you can do differently. Do you want to comment? I've been talking a lot.
No, I agree with that. Like, I mean, our brains naturally want to go to like, oh, I intended on doing this, not actually hurting you, but you putting something out, like saying something or doing something or not doing something, even though your intention can be good, there's an objective, like, I guess, objective and subjective response from another person, and that you have to be considerate of. No man is an island, I guess, is like the phrase, but like actually being conscious of other people is an important part of doing that. I mean, I don't know what I'm saying.
It's okay.
The road to hell is paved with good intentions. You've heard that phrase before. That's where that comes from.
You're doing a great job. You explained it. So anyway, I'll just continue if you're fine with it.
Yes.
So what I'm trying to say in this example of the school I went to is the people at the school are the nicest people ever. I don't think they had bad intentions. What I'm trying to say is you can't say or appear to be like pro-diversity if you're not actually doing anything to support the very real challenges that people of color have that people who are white do not. And for instance, I knew people who had significantly larger scholarships from the school than I did because their SAT score was a little bit higher than mine. And yet I was constantly being called on for events and brochures and photo shoots to make the school appear diverse, but I wasn't seeing that being compensated or acknowledged in a way that was tangible. I mean scholarship money, I mean support. And the reason why I bring that up is because I currently work in the nonprofit space. And one of the most important things in the nonprofit space is fundraising. And one of the ways that we need to fundraise is to show how we're using the money we're receiving to help people. And one of the ways we show that we help people is by collecting stories. And I don't like even using the word collecting because it makes people's stories sound like pocket change. But that is the word that is used a lot in the nonprofit space. And I had a very long conversation with my boss today about this because she really hates that in the nonprofit world, people's stories have been used as if they're just pocket change, like a means to an end, a way of getting more fundraising. And she is very adamant that she does not want our nonprofit to be that way. And I absolutely love that because, and I want to just say my boss is white, and she's someone who I can tell does the work to educate herself about how people of color feel when they are being exploited for the color of their skin or for their traumatic hard knock story. Yes, I have been through a lot. Yes, I was from kind of a poor upbringing. I mean, we always see how other people had it worse, but there were times when what we ate was from literally an elementary school that had to get rid of food because it had expired technically, but it wasn't bad. You know how things get expired on the expiration date, but they're not bad yet? Jan's nodding his head.
Yes.
That was like a gift. There were times when my family ate food from a soup kitchen. There were times when I worked my entire childhood at the flea market to make some money, to buy some food. My mom started a dance group and we did that for 7 years where dancing was literally my job. And I remember we would perform shows every other Wednesday night at the tourist Chamorro Village where tourists would come to eat Chamorro food and see entertainment, and we were the entertainment. And we would take that $200 check and my mom would cash it immediately and we would go to the grocery store and buy food for that week. I also was a housekeeper for many years and a babysitter, and I had to scrub other people's toilets and clean other people's houses and developed a whole bunch of like sinus issues because of it and back problems because of it. But even though that's a part of my story, I don't like the freaking narrative of woe is her, the poor Black girl who needed the white man to come and save her. That is the freaking oldest narrative of colonialism that I am sick and tired of. There is a way of telling someone's story and acknowledging them that honors their struggle and sees it and recognizes it, and also acknowledges the contribution that we as people of color have because of our perspective and our upbringing being so different from a lot of white people who are in institutions and leading organizations. So the thing that I love about my boss is she actually has set aside in our budget to compensate people with stipends, which is unheard of when someone's submitting a story. I talk a lot about struggling with postpartum depression and anxiety, about PTSD, mental illness, blah, blah, blah. And I have had media outlets come to me and not only demand that I write about my story in gory detail, but they demand that I turn it into them at a certain time and adhere to a schedule, and they don't want to pay me a single dime for it. And that felt so disgusting to me. They thought I should just be happy that I had the opportunity to be published on their thing. I'm like, no. The way that they positioned my story was always as if I was like the poor Black girl being taken advantage of or whatever. And I know that there are some white people probably listening to this who are thinking, we can't do anything right. No matter what we try to do, someone always like beats us up or calls us out for saying something wrong when we're just trying to do our best. And there's this gal, her name's Glennon Doyle. She's white and she's huge. She's an author and she runs a nonprofit. And she was talking about that, how she's trying to be more inclusive and aware of racial issues. And she keeps messing up, she says, and people get mad. And she was speaking to all of her white sisters, and she said, white sisters as in white community. And she said, being called out or embarrassed or humiliated for saying something wrong when it comes to racism or race issues, if that's all I have to deal with, it's going to be okay. Like, why is it that so many white people shun away from this work of being aware of race issues just because you're scared of being humiliated? At least you don't have to be scared of jogging down the street and getting shot. Like, at least, like, if you just take a minute to realize that the price of you doing this work and putting yourself out there, yeah, people might get mad at you. And I try not to be that way. I try to be like, hey, thanks for actually, like, there's several white people who reached out to me when I said on Instagram I was going to make this podcast episode. And people have reached out and said, oh my gosh, please make an episode about this. I didn't even know about racism until this happened, or I made friends with a Black guy, or I dated a Black guy and my father flipped out, or this other person who was like, I'm pretty sure I have ingrained racism. I don't want to, but it's probably my upbringing because I don't know any Black people. You know, it's just acknowledging it. And I appreciate those of you who acknowledge it and say, I want to learn more. I want to get better. I think that's the best place that you can start. And if there's some Black people who get pissed at you, then there's a lot of angry Black people out there. There's a lot of angry people of color. And honestly, I think it's a righteous anger. Should they be taking it out on everybody? That's a whole different topic. And I think that varies from person to person. I'm not like that, but sometimes I do get really angry. I mean, even in our own building in Southern California, which is pretty diverse, there was a white woman who was extremely rude and disgusting to me and two other Black people who were waiting for the elevator, just clearly, literally looking at us in actual disgust. And then I walk down 5 minutes later with my white husband, and she literally smiles and waves and acts like everything's fine. And I'm like, oh, so now I'm less disgusting to you because I'm next to a white guy?
Mm-hmm.
It's just insane. And
yeah.
Anyway.
That's like the white savior idea that some people seem to have, which to me is
well, yeah,
really
let's
weird.
break down our relationship here. So you were attracted to me, and I've asked you on this. I'm like, did you know you were into Black girls? Like, why? Like,
no.
What? Like, why?
I mean,
why were you into me?
I was never specifically into Black girls. I was attracted to you for a variety of different things. You were a good dancer.
Mm-hmm.
That was attractive. Just we got along and talked to each other very well, and similar interests and that sort of stuff. And like, those are the things. It wasn't because you were Black. I mean,
yeah. But so you didn't realize that you were doing something unconventional by dating like by entering into a biracial relationship?
No.
You didn't think, oh, this is unconventional. My family's going to think this is weird.
Nope. Never crossed my mind.
Let me tell you something. I have been around a lot of white people, and I hate to say this, but since being in a relationship with Jan and interacting with his family and friends, I have not been treated the way that I should be treated. Now I know that. But at that time, I just like to give everyone the benefit of the doubt. And I stuck by Jan's side because I love him and I wanted to do that for him.
Yeah.
But now that I'm looking back, this is when I realize the stark contrast. When I am around people of color, they do not make me feel that way. When I talk to people of color, they're all, hi, how are you? What's going on in your life? What are you doing? That's amazing. Good for you. Tell me more. When I am talking
normal conversation stuff,
like acknowledging your dignity and your human existence. When I talk to people who are white, who are connected with Jan, they literally don't even say.
Not all people.
Not all people. Not all people. We have some beautiful, incredible, amazing white friends who are open-minded and understanding. But I have for years experienced people not even saying hi, people not saying my name, people not acknowledging when I enter the room, people not anything. And it's like, you could be like, oh, well, you just want attention. No. Well, for the longest time, I just accepted this as normal. Like, oh, it's not a big deal. But after year, you start to feel like, what's off here?
Mm-hmm.
You know, we all have an intuition. And I told mine to shut up for a very long time because I didn't want to think poorly of anyone. I, like many people, didn't, again, remember, I'm from Guam. I didn't think people were racist. And because I didn't grow up in a Black community or a white and Black segregated community, my mom, who is Black, didn't feel the need to educate me about racism. I learned, about the 1950s and the segregation and about the white bathrooms versus the Black bathrooms. And I learned about the history that everyone learned. But I didn't learn about ingrained racism.
The glossed over one.
The glossed over bullshit history. Yes. Which we'll go into that.
Yeah.
How Jan had to actually learn a little bit more. But my mom didn't tell me, like when I told my mom I was thinking about going to school in the Midwest or I was thinking about going to school in the South, she just very kindly said, yeah, I really don't think that's a good idea. I really think that you should either go to school in California or Hawaii or Florida. And she's like, maybe not even Florida. My mom just said, you need to focus on going to a school with diversity, with people who look like you. And that's all she said. She didn't say that there's white people out there that are going to want to kill you or that are going to treat you like garbage. My mom was very careful not to put messages into my head because maybe my mom was optimistic and hopeful and believed that people might change. Again, my mom had been living in Guam for a long time. Maybe she was hopeful that things had gotten better. She did tell me, though, she was like, I can tell you right now that my sister, your aunt, who lived in Georgia, was just walking down the street and two white men in a pickup literally stopped the car and rolled down their window and spat at her. Spat at her. This was in the early 2000s, okay? That was all my mom shared. She didn't want to scare me, but it was enough for me to feel like, what in the hell? Am I different? And boy, did I realize it when I walked into my university and there was no one who looked like me, pretty much. And everyone kept referencing me as the Black girl, or when I would talk in my dialect, which is basically, the way that some Black people talk. Not all Black people talk this way, but when I get a little bit sassy, I guess is what the white people refer to it as, which is not what it is. People be like, oh, Mia, how you're so funny. I love when you turn your Black on. Can you do it again? What? It's not a character. I'm not a character for your amusement. My Blackness is not entertainment. It's who I am. It's a part of me. And so is my Hispanic heritage, by the way. And it really was so apparent to me that people literally there had never been around a Black person because of the way they were talking about me and referring to me and my Blackness.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, back to the marriage and our relationship. So I didn't realize how mistreated I was being until I started hanging around people of color and was being treated like one of the family and was being treated well and like I existed and I mattered and I could cry just talking about that because it feels so unfair. It feels so unfair to choose love, to choose Jan, and to be treated like I'm some problem. And it's been hard. There was a long time in our marriage where I felt like there was a divide between us because you were in denial about what those events really meant. And that denial made me feel like you didn't really...
I also didn't want to think that people were racist. You want to think well of people.
You want to think well of people, which I understand.
But like over the years and being more around, I guess, Mia and other Black people and seeing that difference between how people treat people.
Yeah, you've been seeing how people treat me. You basically have noticed that when I'm around people of color,
and like,
they're much nicer to me.
Yes, and how some people react to these things. Like, I think one of my first like real experiences of that, I was kind of oblivious when it was happening, was when you went to the seamstress to get your dress altered, and this lady was going on and on about how, oh, you're so lucky you married like a white man, basically, and got your green card.
Yeah, this Hispanic
which Mia did not
seamstress
get a green card for me. She's been an American citizen her whole life.
Yeah.
Guam is an American territory.
Yeah.
USA, US territory.
And my dad's from LA, my mom's from the USVI, the US Virgin Islands.
It's like,
but that's another aspect of racism that I also receive, is that when people see that my husband is white, they automatically assume that I must be an immigrant. Like, I couldn't have possibly married a white guy for any other reason than to get a green card. And again, you're racial profiling me. It's not okay to just assume that about people. And notice when you do it. Like, notice when you do it, you know? And, or another thing is how hurtful it is when my white friends invalidate when I say, you know, my kids are white and I go to the store or I'm on a walk to the park, and people automatically assume that I am the babysitter. And everybody just tells me, oh no, it's because you're young. They just think you can't be their mom because you're so young. That is such a freaking invalidation of... Everyone has an intuition. I can tell when someone thinks I'm the babysitter because of the color of my skin. Yeah. Because of the way they're not like, oh, because you're so young. They literally they're looking at my kids, trying to see my face in them after I say I'm their mom. They're like, really? And they're looking at our faces back and forth, back and forth. If they were just thinking that I was young, they would just be looking at me. But they're looking at my kids, and they're looking at me, and then they're looking at my kids, and then they're looking at me. And I can't tell you how many white friends I've told this to. I've said, I went to the park, and again, someone thought I was the babysitter. I went to go get donuts, and this guy literally asked if my kids were my kids, and I said, yes. And he said, how is it that they're so white when you're so dark?
Hi.
Jan wasn't with me.
I wasn't. Yeah, I've seen this happen multiple times.
Yes, and then one time I was at a playground with my son, and a little girl walked over to me and said, is that your baby? And I said, yes. And she said, he's much whiter than you, and you're black. Why is he white and you're black? How are you his mommy? That is ingrained racism. I'm giving all of these examples because I want people to understand what it is like to be a person of color, and a person of color in a biracial relationship with kids who have different skin than me. It really hurts when you've carried and pushed out babies and then people think that you're just the freaking babysitter. It really hurts. And you know what hurts even more is when you share with someone how your feelings were hurt and they invalidate it by saying they just thought you were just young. It's not that they're racist. Stop making excuses for people's ingrained racism. Let's start there. Let's start there. How about that? You know, you can't acknowledge or learn or grow in the area of racial understanding if you are constantly on the defensive and ignoring the facts in front of you. And a lot of people of color don't even want to speak up. We're sick of talking about racism. But you know what's even more hurtful is when someone like me takes the time to talk about it or share or open up about it, and someone just shuts it down by saying they weren't racist, it was something else. And you know what? Here's the difference. I bet you that the people who are white, who are walking around, who are not in biracial marriages, I bet you don't go to the store or the park and someone looks at you and looks at your kids and looks at you and looks at your kids and goes, I wonder if she's the mom. I don't think you have to deal with that.
That's the thing. Other thing is like coming from a white person. As a white person in your life experience, a lot of you think, oh, I've never seen racism. I don't think racism exists. And I've heard this opinion way too many times. It's like, no, racism is just outside of your life experience.
Why would
because
you know
you're white.
Racism?
So you wouldn't know it exists. You just have to trust the other people that have experienced it, who are in that life situation, that
they're telling
you the truth, because they are telling you the truth.
Yeah. There's lots of funny videos out there, funny and sad, of people interviewing white people and saying,
particularly in Orange County.
Yeah. Do you think racism exists? And the white people are like, no, I've never experienced it. I've never seen it. Nope, I don't think it exists. And it literally is to cast a light on the fact that white people literally think that if they haven't experienced something, therefore it does not exist. I've never been to outer space. Let's just give that as an analogy. But when someone writes a book about their experience going to Mars or the moon, we haven't been to Mars, sorry. I'm going to read it with an open mind because I've never been to Mars. To the moon, sorry. And I don't know what that's like. Or to space. So what I'm trying to say here is, please stop inserting beliefs into a space that you have no idea or concept about. That is you have to have an open mind when it comes to these discussions.
Yeah. And if you want another poignant example that comes to mind is one time we were at the park and Mia's brother was there, my brother-in-law, with us.
Who's dark-skinned.
He's dark-skinned, a little even darker than Mia, a little bit. And basically,
I wasn't near him because I was in the nearest in a sandbox playing with my son. Yeah. So I was probably 150 feet away from my brother, who was on the swing.
Yeah, I was there too somewhere, wasn't I?
You were not there.
Oh, I'm thinking a different day.
2 white people were about to call the cops on my brother. Here's how I found out. The only other black woman walked all the way over to me at the sand pit and said, people are wondering who this guy is. My brother was 18 at the time. People are wondering who he is. And she's like, I told them that you look like you're related to him since you're the only other black woman in the park. And I told them to go to you and ask. But nobody wants to go and talk to you. So they decided that they're going to call the police.
Her brother wasn't doing anything.
My brother wasn't doing anything. And she said, so I told them that I would go over and talk to you and have you come over. So I came over and I asked what was wrong. And I'm just like in such a huff. I'm like, what is going on? So these white people come over and they're trying to act like they weren't just about to pull the most racist crap in the world. Mm-hmm. And they were like, well, we saw that he was making hand movements. My brother's autistic and he makes some hand movements. And we were worried that he might be violent. Mm-hmm. My autistic brother, who literally looks harmless, was making hand movements and 2 white people were about to call the police on my brother. Do you realize how traumatic that would have been for my autistic brother to have the cops come and potentially approach him or even put handcuffs on him? And I'm sitting 150 feet away and no one's telling me anything. Of course, I'm not keeping an eye on my brother. He's 18. He likes having his space. I don't need to sit there and watch him swing. I was with my 2-year-old in the sand pit, okay? And yet these people were going to call the cops. And the reason why that didn't happen was because the only other woman of color there knew what was happening and came over and talked to me.
Yeah. And if it was a white kid doing it,
if it was a white kid, holy cow, no one would have called the cops. No one
wouldn't even been worried.
No one would have even been worried.
It's just like this ridiculous idea that
black men
people
are
violent. It's like, I don't even know.
That's ingrained.
It's ingrained in culture.
Mm-hmm. There's so many different stories, and I hope you guys can see the value in just hearing these individual experiences, because if you don't have someone that you can sit down with to talk about this stuff with, like, what is your experience of being Black? This is the best way for you to learn about that in an open way, in an honest way. And it doesn't feel good to walk through the world and to worry. Like, ever since that moment, my brother really enjoyed going to the park by himself. My brother loves to swing on the swing. It's how he stims. He's autistic. And because he's older, he doesn't like being babysat. And so I would drop him off at the neighborhood park 5 minutes down the street from where we lived. And I would say I'd be back in an hour. After that happened, I could never do that again. I had to babysit my brother because of fear that someone was going to call the freaking cops on him for being Black and being on a swing. Mm-hmm. Apparently, you can't swing and be Black either. You can't exercise and be Black. You can't swing and be Black. Someone's going to call the cops on you. You know what I mean? And, people are worried when they're Black that even if they put their hands the wrong way, when a cop's there, that they're going to get shot and the cop's going to call it self-defense. Another example I want to give is I recently became really good friends with a white gal. And no, I do not identify all my friends as white or Black or whatever, but this is an episode about race, so just bear with me. Mm-hmm. She's white. And we don't go around our lives thinking about people as white or Black. Yes, but we're talking about race here, so I'm just going to be real with y'all. So we were having a great lunch, a conversation, and she mentioned that she didn't really think that racism was a real thing. Thankfully, I was in a really good time of the month. I was not on my period because I listened very kindly and let her talk about her not thinking racism was real. And then she shared how her sister, who was dating a Nigerian, brought that perspective into her life. Because how can you know of racism when you are white? Again, reiterating that fact. So what happened was she said that each time her Nigerian, now brother-in-law, was in her car, she got pulled over by the cops 4 times in a row. She was like, oh my gosh, people aren't lying. Racism is real. I keep getting pulled over because there's a Black man in my car every time. And then one time, her Nigerian brother-in-law was fixing the window to their house. And she pulled up and her sister ran out of the house to say hi to her. And then they all went inside. And a few moments later, there were 4 cop cars outside of the house. Cops were banging on the door. They opened the door and the cops said that they had got a call from a neighbor across the street, who, by the way, was an old white lady, that a Black man was scaring a white woman and breaking into her home. The woman that they were talking about was his wife, and he was fixing the window. I really wanted to be able to share this conversation with my sweet, peppy, normal, typical Mia voice, but I'm upset. I'm angry that this is a reality in 2020. I'm really, really upset. And I think it's okay for every single one of us people of color who feel raw about the killing that just happened, who feel worried. I have friends who are beautiful, strong, incredible Black women who have Black sons, and they are scared for their children's lives. That really makes me angry. It makes me so upset. So that's kind of my experiences with that. I don't know if there's anything else you want to share from our marriage standpoint other than people thinking I'm your immigrant wife, which I don't think there's any shame in being an immigrant. More power to the beautiful, incredible immigrants that literally carry this country on their backs. What I'm trying to say is it's messed up to assume I'm an immigrant because of the color of my skin. That's what I'm trying to say there.
Yes.
One thing that people can do, thank you so much if you've listened this far, you're incredible. One thing that you can do is watch this Netflix documentary produced by Chelsea Lately. Is that her last name, Lately? She's a comedian. Anyway, she's white, she's Jewish. Again, we're talking about race. Or Chelsea Handler. I don't know. Anyway, it's called Hello Privilege, It's Me, Chelsea. Or Hello White Privilege, It's Me, Chelsea. You should be able to find it if you just research or Google.
We'll link it below with the proper name.
Yeah, it's fine. It's a great documentary where she, as a white woman, basically goes around talking to Black people about their experience and sharing how she has been oblivious to her white privilege this whole time. Another thing we should have did was define white privilege. Again, I am sorry that I didn't have more structure to this episode, but I'm doing the best I can, y'all. So for anyone that's like angry right now about privilege and saying that they weren't privileged and I was born poor too, Mia, I'm sorry you were born poor, first of all. Secondly, privilege doesn't mean you never had to work hard, and it doesn't mean that you weren't poor. What privilege means is that there's certain securities, safeties, and benefits that you are afforded because of the color of your skin that I will never get because of the color of my skin. For instance, you can jog down the street and most likely not get shot, versus someone who's Black could be swinging on a swing and someone will call the cops on them and traumatize them for the rest of their lives. So that is what privilege is. I hope that's clear, because a lot of people think it means that they didn't have to work hard. That's not what we're saying. So please go watch that documentary. It's a great beginner starter kit for white privilege and racism. Chelsea Handler, or Lately, I'm sorry, I don't know what her last name is, did a great job. There's a great piece in it about her boyfriend, ex-boyfriend from back in the day, who she was doing drugs with. And anytime they were caught, he was sent to jail and she was just given a slap on the wrist. And how this happened over and over and over again. And I don't know if they go into detail in that documentary, but there is so much more research you can do about the double standard in our police and judicial system, which we have seen obviously in the Ahmaud Arbery cases, the fact that his murderers were not arrested until 2 months after he was murdered. And it took the whole country to get involved for that to happen. But basically, Oprah talks a lot about this as well. There are Black people who've been put in prison for years, sentenced for having an ounce of weed when marijuana was illegal, whereas white people who've done even more heinous crimes were given way less time and way less punishment. And now that marijuana is legal, I think in all the states,
most of them,
most of the states,
at least
there are a lot of Black people who are not being retried so that they can get a shorter sentence or that they can be released, because the crime that they committed when marijuana was illegal technically should be retried, because now what they did when it was illegal is no longer illegal. But they're not getting that justice. They're not getting that opportunity to be retried, which is horrible. Anyway, So basically what I'm trying to say is I thought about doing a bunch of research and specifying specific cases and years and people and families who've been affected from racism. But if there's anything I've learned from this process of creating content, it's that doing all the work for people is actually not going to help you. If you really care about this issue and you want to become racially conscious and do your part as a white person to change the communities you live in, you really have to start by doing the research yourself. I think start with the documentary I mentioned, and also just go ahead and Google racism in America. You'll discover that there's a whole lot of history that you weren't made aware of in your schools, especially if you only had white teachers, which brings me to another important point. Jan was doing some research and discovered a whole bunch of racist history where Black people were being mistreated and killed and things like that. And he looked at me one night and was like, oh my gosh, you'll never believe this. This happened in North Carolina and blah, blah, blah. And it wasn't written in the history books and someone destroyed the information or hid it. And I just looked at him and I said, didn't you know that all of history was written by white people?
Yeah.
And you had this look on your face, you were it was a huge epiphany for you.
It was a
pretty huge epiphany. You're like, oh, so that means that the perspective that we've been reading all of history from is only from this one perspective?
Well, I think I realized that prior to that. It wasn't really that wasn't really the epiphany moment. The epiphany moment came when I was watching or reading about the different history and that kind of stuff. Because a lot of the history that you're fed, including Christopher Columbus, who's complete BS. Gosh. That's a whole nother topic though. All this history that you've been taught was written by the white people because Black people were basically enslaved and
they didn't get taught how to write.
They didn't taught how to write.
They taught how to read. They didn't have access to things like ink and paper. Mm-hmm. Those things cost money.
Yes. So even after we all learn in white history class that basically the slaves were freed and by Abraham Lincoln and the end.
Yep.
And then they were free and
they were saved by the white man.
Yeah. But
who was the person who enslaved them in the first place?
Yes. But no, well, what I was going towards was more that after that, there's this whole lost history between there and now, even up until obviously it's now, because the racism 100% still exists. But like so much of that was whitewashed. Like I was literally in this town in North Carolina. I was there to shoot and film an interview or something like that. And then after leaving there, I discovered that like this whole thing went down because in Wilmington, North Carolina specifically, where there was a huge push of like a bunch of people from multiple races coming together and saying, oh, we want to give Black people the right to vote, which is a whole nother thing that didn't come till later as well. And like this whole thing was like happening and like the legislation was going through, and literally a group of white people who believed that Black people were
2/3 of a human.
Probably that, and didn't have any right to vote or whatever. Like basically they saw them as disgusting, and there was newspaper articles that showed this, like basically spelled out like them saying that like, oh, Black people are disgusting and they'll steal your women and all sorts of gross things. And like they literally went and like raided like the legislative building and like where the people were gathering, and like I think they killed a bunch of people and literally interrupted legal proceedings to stop it
and having the power to vote.
Yes, and like this is like literally was like pushed down and hidden until like it came out, and like because there's still records of it and newspaper articles and all that kind of stuff. But it's like completely left out of the history books, and that should be such a big part of our history of America, is
knowing how like, Black people have been systematically oppressed. Because when people talk about racism, when we talk about how it's a system, people are like, what do you mean? Racism is just when someone calls someone a nigger. No. The Jan was just describing how this group of white people that were trying to make sure that Black people didn't get the right to vote, they literally wrote propaganda painting Black people as these demonic, disgusting rapists people. Like there was an agenda. There was a systemic painting and marketing around Black people being this way, evil, scary, stay away from them. The same way how during World War II, there were ads on TV, of animations of Germans and Hitler looking a certain way, right?
And Japanese people
and Japanese looking a certain way, because that's what people do when they want you to fear or hate a certain group of people. And that is what happened in our country when it comes to minorities, when it comes to Black
including
people.
those peoples too. Still there's a stigma around it.
Absolutely. And when we, and this episode is specifically about the African American experiences, that's the one I know. I am part Hispanic, but I am mostly Black, and so I look mostly Black, so that's the only experience I can speak to. But absolutely, if I was sitting across from a South Asian person, a Japanese person, a Chinese, a Korean, anybody, a Micronesian, a Pacific Islander, they could share their own experience. Minorities in general, we are all receiving hate and racism, and especially during the age of coronavirus, Asian people are being treated like garbage, and people are being extremely racist, including our president. Sorry, not sorry. Not sorry at all, honestly. And if any people are still defending him for that, you really need to wake up. And that's what I'm trying to say when it comes to racism. And if you really are saying you want to be educated and you really want to help to change things, I'm going to just say this right now. President Trump is racist. And if you actually dug into anything, he has so much history and clips and things that he said of him being racist to people, not just Black people. He is so racist. And again, I'm not going to do the work to pull those things up for you. I've had white people argue with me and say, show me the clips, show me the articles. No. I'm sorry, but my ancestors and my heritage and my community has already taken enough. If the smallest thing that I'm asking you to do is to just do the research yourself. And that, Dr. Brene Brown, an incredible storyteller, researcher, psychologist, licensed clinical social worker, she says it so beautifully that the people who have been systematically and continually and historically oppressed and beaten down should not be responsible for creating the tables at which these discussions need to happen. In other words,
the people who oppress them should facilitate those discussions. The people who oppress
them, because you guys still hold the power.
In turn, help those people. Yes. Especially since a lot of the systematic racism and propaganda actually, so there was a branch of the government, the federal government, that actually put out a lot of that propaganda
Mm-hmm.
and created a lot of that systemic racism, and a lot of that continued in the form of like sectioning off certain parts of like society or a city or something to keep basically all the poor people there and the black people or whoever you were trying to keep in that area, and just to keep them out of your area.
Yep.
Or to keep your property or whatever value you perceive higher for you.
Because if a black person lived in your neighborhood, it literally, the value of your property in your neighborhood literally went down.
Mm-hmm.
And that reminds me, there's also that huge case. I think a movie came out about it. But back in the 50s, when the federal government finally said there can't be segregated white and black schools, and Arkansas literally was like, we're going to pull our state card and say that as a state, we will not abide by this. And it caused a huge amount of like legislation and lobbying and a bunch of things that had to come out. And so if you want to learn more about that, you can look that up. You can just Google like segregated schools, Arkansas, 1950s, and you'll find it. But there's so much history that needs to be learned. And to give you an example of how like you really weren't taught the history and that really happened. I remember sitting in history class in high school, and we were learning about World War II and Japan and how Japan lost the war. And my Japanese classmate literally, like, her eyes went wide and she was like, I was never taught this. We were taught that we won the war or that it just like ended. Or she was like, I was never told this. Countries will do whatever they can to make their image appear spotless. You know, the fact that the World War II was such a huge event and everybody knows that Japan lost, but in her schools, when she was born and raised for the most part in Japan, they still taught the youth that they won the war. And I'm bringing this up because I don't want people to continue to be shocked or surprised that there is history that they've never been told about or might even have been completely lied to. 100%. I didn't learn a lot about Black history also because I was homeschooled, and guess what? Most homeschooling books are written by white Christian people. And again, I'm not trying to demonize all the white people, but what I am trying to say is, how can you expect there to be a diverse perspective if you're only including the perspective of one person, of a person who looks and thinks and acts a certain way, one way, what people would perceive to be the right way. And anyone else who's born outside of those lines, you're unlucky. And it's really hard. You know, I think being a biracial couple, I think has caused a lot of isolation in our lives. I think makes us feel kind of like cut off. And I'm going to be honest with everyone listening. I, for a long time, and I'm still working through this, have harbored guilt that because Jan is associated with me, he's cut off from his community. That people
Which
look.
You shouldn't feel.
I feel bad.
I introvert, so I don't I don't reach out to people too often. So if I reach out to you, you should feel very special.
But in reality, I have told you like that it continues to make me feel like I'm tainting you because of my Blackness. And that is literally me reliving racism in our own marriage by thinking of myself as less than because of what's happening, because other people are making us feel or making me feel like I'm less than because of the way they're treating us. And if you're in a situation like that, I want you to know that other people's inability to love you has nothing to do with you. You cannot let them make you think, convince you that you're not good enough. You're ugly, shameful, whatever the freak they want to make you think by the way they're treating you. You just need to separate yourself from them. And sometimes that's painful because you might be related to them. But it is going to kill you. Okay? I talk a lot about feeling suicidal and being depressed and relating it to my childhood. But I'm going to be freaking honest right now in a way I've never been before. And that's to say that the people who have honestly been treating me this way, like I'm not good enough or I'm not worth saying hi to or worth acknowledging or any of that, that contributed to that.
Depression stems from a serious feeling of worthlessness. And I honestly think it's unfair that I'm constantly blaming everything on, well, my childhood, I was abused and neglected, and that's true. But the abuse has continued in my adulthood because of the way people are treating me. And it it made me depressed, kind of still makes me a little depressed that my husband is also suffering the repercussions. But as he's reminded me many, many times that he has chosen me and he will continue to choose me. And that is not something that I coerce him to do.
Nope.
Or force him to do.
Nope.
We decided to get
Dishes
married.
maybe sometime.
We decided to get married regardless of the racism and the backlash that we received. And if anyone's listening to this and is thinking, Mia, you're making this up in your head, which by the way, I told myself that for a long time. And I'm going to speak to all the women right now. You cannot continue to tell your intuition to shut up. It is a gift from God to protect ourselves. And every single time I told myself that I'm being over emotional or immature or I'm making it up in my head, I ended up paying for it. It ended up coming to bite me in the butt because I ended up being right in my instinct and I should have trusted it. You know when someone's not treating you the way that you deserve. And the longer you live in la la land pretending that everything is fine, the only person you're continuing to hurt is yourself. And now that I have kids, I have to be even more aware of it because I do not want my kids to ignore their intuition, to tell them to treat their feelings like they're just garbage. Your feelings matter. They're telling you something. And for me, it was that I wasn't going to be loved or appreciated the way that I deserved, and that it has nothing to do with me. And I'm not going to lie anymore and pretend that my suicidal ideation and struggles with severe depression only related to my childhood, because it relates a lot to how I'm currently being treated, and especially how I was being treated when we started to date and when we were engaged and about to be married. Those are very traumatic memories for me. And if anyone else is thinking that I'm making this up, I want you to know that people from my wedding, that was almost 5 years ago, still, when I hang out with them, I am still getting people asking me if those particular people who have been mistreating me on the on side of the family, people ask me if they're racist. People who are white, even too. They're like, it was so obvious that they were unhappy. It was so obvious that they didn't look at you with love and respect. And I'm not trying to sound arrogant here. Jan can back me up. I'm a pretty well-liked person in my circles. I'm a good friend. I'm loving. I'm caring. I'm giving. I love people genuinely. It's the reason why I do the work I do online. I don't make any money doing this work. I do it because I care. And I want people to know that they're loved and cared for and that they can overcome whatever difficulty they're facing.
Can confirm.
Can confirm. Thanks.
Affirmative.
And that's why it was so obvious that there were people on your side that didn't like me, because there was everyone else in the room. There were 200 people at our wedding. There was so much love for me and you and so much happiness for our marriage. I am not making this up. I have not told anybody this. I'm only now speaking it out loud because I've worked on healing that part of myself. But I will tell you, it's like a wound that just barely closed up. There's not even a scab. It still stings and it still hurts and it's still gross and I'm still pissed and it's still unfair. And honestly, I hope to God that those people, even if they never apologize, at least freaking acknowledge what it is that they did and how unfair it was, and that hopefully they don't treat anybody else that way. And the thing that I want to bring up is that because you're close, you're going to be blind to the racist tendencies. So if you have a person of color in your life tell you that they think that Auntie so-and-so is a little racist and that your friend who has some variation of colored skin doesn't want to go to your birthday party for that reason, please don't be selfish and take it personally. If they don't want to go to your birthday party because Auntie so-and-so who's racist is going to be there, do not tell them that they're overreacting. Do not tell them that they're making it up in their head. Respect, acknowledge, say that you're sorry, And if you're really awesome and cool and want to change the culture, confront your Aunt Harriet or whoever is being racist and say, hey, you know my friend Jessica? She doesn't want to come to my party because of that one thing that you said about her hair last week. Asking her if she shops in the ethnic aisle or whatever it is that your Aunt Harriet said. Confront your Aunt Harriet. I don't think anyone wants to admit if their family or friends are racist. But what I'm trying to say in particular to the white people listening to this episode is realize that you're going to have blind spots. Acknowledge if your friend takes the freaking time and guts to tell you, hey, I'm sorry, but your mom is racist. And then take it a step further and actually talk to your family member about it, whoever it is that's being racist. Because it's really not up to me. It shouldn't be up to the people of color to have these conversations with the racist people in your lives. It's up to you guys who have the power and the privilege. And believe me, I wish I had that power and privilege, but I don't.
Yeah.
Because
and honestly,
I was not given that in my history.
Aren't going to listen to the people they're racist about. They're just not going to listen to them because they literally look at them as their opinion doesn't matter and they don't matter kind of mentality. So it has to come from someone that matters to them for them to to understand what racism is and how they might be racist. And also check your biases. It's an important thing in life in general, but definitely check your biases when it comes
Right. Well, like for instance,
these things.
Here's another example. You have a family member who misplaced a coat. And this family member automatically assumed that their housekeeper must have stolen it because she's Mexican. That, my friends, is racism.
Yes.
I'm giving all of these examples, and I'm sorry for my cheeky tone, but it's either this tone or full-on yelling. And I'm not going to apologize for where I'm at with this. This is a very unresolved wound for me because every time us people of color try to heal it and work through it and forgive the white ancestors who messed everything up for us, every time we try to do that, another Ahmaud Arbery situation happens and rips that wound back open. So please be gentle with me. And all of us people of color who are angry, we are trying our best. But people of color are still being shot down in the streets. And that is not something that we should placate ourselves for anymore. We need white people who are conscious and intelligent and aware and who give a damn to step up, listen to their friends, figure out how you can get involved, educate yourselves, and listen. Really listen without judgment, without invalidating, and then take action. And it does start with your family. It does start with your white friends. It does start with the businesses and organizations that you work in. It does start with checking your own biases. And by the way, the person who believes her Mexican housekeeper stole her coat, she ended up finding it later. So I just want to give a conclusion to that story.
It had been misplaced.
It had been misplaced. Anyway, that's all I have to say for today.
Me too. I need some ice cream.
We have some double chocolate Strauss ice cream in the fridge. I want to say to anyone who's made it to the end of this episode, like the two people who made it to the end of this episode, maybe Fran, my good friend Fran, maybe Kathleen, my lovely friend Kathleen. I love you. Really. I love and appreciate the people who do the work to educate themselves, to learn how to make things better. Because if there's anything I hear the most is that there are white people saying, why should I take responsibility for something that my great-great-great-grandfather started a long time ago? Because you still hold the power. You still have the privilege. If you want to make the world a better place, it is now your responsibility. It is in your hands. And what kind of world are you leaving for your kids? What kind of world are you leaving for your descendants? I hope one that has a lot less hate in it. I hope one that when my autistic brother wants to swing on a swing, no one's going to call the cops. I hope one that when someone wants to run down the street, they're not going to get shot. But yeah, please just try to be more open. We appreciate you guys. Thank you so much for listening.
thank you for continuing on this journey. I know I mentioned that I was going to do some exclusive Patreon episodes, but I'm actually considering shutting down Patreon. And I will let you know more about that. It just feels like I have so much to manage. I don't know. But anyway, so don't stress. There will be more episodes coming up. Stay tuned, subscribe, share. Please share this with other people. This is an important conversation. I'm not just saying that for the likes. It's so important.
More people need to talk about it.
More people need to talk about it and hear other perspectives. Anyway, thank you guys so much. Hope you have some ice cream to eat after this episode because it was a heavy one. Love you guys. Talk to you next week. Bye.
Bye.